Morning after a historic election in which Republicans got their ass handed to them and Trumpism was condemned across America, we are once again seeing the resurgence of a very tired, predictable, and blatantly false talking point from Republicans. So I wanted to take a second and talk about it. If you, like me, were watching the election results roll in across America, governor's races in New Jersey and Virginia, state Supreme Court votes in Pennsylvania, Attorney General and Lieutenant Governor in Virginia as well, you might have seen those maps where different counties fill in based on what party they went for. And unfortunately, Republicans saw the same maps, but they don't fucking know how to interpret them. I don't know who Bill Mitchell is. I don't give a shit. If it wasn't for big cities, Democrats would never win anything. Republicans look at this map and they think like, oh, we control America. We're most of America. We saw the same kind of bullshit after Donald Trump got elected in November. Y'all, it's only been a year. We made it through a year. We're making it through a year since the election. But we saw this right after Election Day 2024. Right, Lara Trump, who is not known for being the sharpest hack in the box, posted this. Right, this was the big flex after the election. Try to impeach this. She really thinks that Republicans control most of America. Let's remember that Donald Trump didn't even get 50% of the vote, and that voter turnout was only 65% of registered voters. She really thought that was a sick own, and she's not the only one. Since Trump got elected, we have seen right-wing grifter pages posting similar memes. Right, shit like this, what the media wants you to believe versus the reality. So just gonna say here, every accusation from the right is a confession. Could you be any more fucking cringe thinking that the name of your account is like a sick own of the libs, when really it's just like a total cope on your part? Right, also posts like this back when Republicans were still thinking that Elon Musk was gonna cut them all a check for $3,000 or $5,000, depending on what conspiracy theory viral video you were watching at the time. This is when they were all real excited about the cuts that Doge was making because, yeah, it's a cult. So just like they thought it was a flex after the election, last night it was their big cope. Like, oh, if it wasn't for big cities, Democrats would never win anything. Yeah, you dumbass. That's because most Americans live in cities. I don't know who is persuaded by this, but Donald Trump says he loves the uneducated. Republicans are doing everything they can to dismantle education in the United States so that people can't think critically at all. I mean, evangelical America, right? Evangelical parenting. I've gone on many rants on this topic, and I will rant about it again ad nauseum. Evangelical America, white Christian nationalism, MAGA Christianity, they all demand immediate, instantaneous obedience of their children. They raise their children with violence and coercion. The goal of that style of parenting is to crush a child's will, to make them obey authority, to make them submit, to get children to no longer trust their own intuition, to no longer think critically, to basically like abandon critical thinking, abandon your own intuition, abandon your own good judgment, and instead mindlessly submit to a leader, mindlessly obey. And that kind of psychological and emotional abuse in childhood and also physical abuse, and that kind of indoctrination in childhood that we see in MAGA America, that produces adults who cannot think critically, have stifled their ability to exercise good judgment, to be inquisitive, curious, investigate. Right, so they see some Republican post something like this, and they're not able to dive in and try and dissect it. They don't even have the kind of skepticism to be like, is this bullshit? This doesn't seem right. So I get why these kinds of memes maybe work on Republicans, because they've spent their entire childhoods being stripped of their ability to think critically, to be independent free thinkers, to have any level of skepticism, any level of discernment. And then at the same time, Republicans have worked for decades to dismantle quality education. It's a 1-2 punch that's been very effective for them. Fascists always need an uneducated populace, and they also need a populace that has been indoctrinated for many years to submit to authority. That's one of the reasons that the Mustache Man did so well in Germany. I have a whole video on the authoritarian parent. You should probably go watch it. My decision to be a non-authoritarian parent had a lot to do with coming out of a strong Calvinist background where I didn't want my daughters in particular, my sons hadn't been born yet, to submit to men. I didn't want my daughters to abandon their critical thinking skills, to abandon their autonomy, to make themselves less than in order to listen to men. I wanted my kids to have strong wills, which they do. God, they definitely do, to be strong-willed and to be able to exercise that will. I wanted my kids to be free, independent thinkers, and I wanted my kids to be their authentic selves. And so I've always been a non-authoritarian parent. Never got behind the concept of obedience. I never expected my children to obey. I would never want that. But MAGA Christians, they do want kids to obey. They do want children to stop questioning. They call it backtalk, impertinence, a rebellious spirit. Anyway, sorry to get on a little tangent there, but I think Republicans see tweets like that from MAGA influencers, MAGA politicians, and they're like, oh yeah, it's the fucking cities. And this is more, I think, also of the Republicans' attempt to create a civil war in this country, right? They want a rural-urban divide. That's why they try and paint cities as like, they use urban as a slur for Black people. They want white rural folks. Not that there aren't tons of Black folks in rural America, tons of Latino folks in rural America, tons of Indigenous folks in rural America. But the right wants to paint this picture of like violent, gang-ridden cities full of urban street youth versus like wholesome heartland of America in, all populated with white people. I don't know, I'm doing a fake Southern accent. It's not even tapping into my original Texas accent. Anyway, but that's the sort of propaganda that we see from the right. And obviously it's being regurgitated here as a cope for Republicans losing so badly last night. It's a way that they're trying to like delegitimize the election results. So once again, let me just hold your hand, Republicans, if you are tempted to believe this shit when you see MAGA influencers or Republican politicians posting it today. You may personally struggle with critical, independent thinking. You may struggle with having skepticism when you see something from somebody that you think is in a position of authority with politics that align with yours. Despite Lara Trump's tweet, land doesn't vote, people do. Land doesn't vote, people do. Land doesn't vote, people do. Most Americans live in cities. Let's just take my state of Oregon and the presidential election results from 2024. Now, if you're not from Oregon, you may not be aware of the fact that most of eastern and southern Oregon is very, very red. The closer you get to Idaho, the more red it gets. And there has been this movement, fringe movement, for quite a while now, where folks in eastern Oregon want to secede and join Idaho. That's never going to happen. They don't seem to understand that the tax base from Multnomah County in particular funds all of their services, right? They could not function. The things that they need to have their part of the state operate could not happen. They are dependent on Portland. They may hate us. Maybe that resentment comes from the fact that we keep them afloat in Eastern Oregon. But if you get out that way, there's a lot of conservative militia types. There's conservative Mormons, and they, of course, want to jump ship and join with Idaho. They like to point to this map. Right, they love to point to the 2024 election map, and before it, the 2020 election map. They're like, see, the eastern part of the state, we're not like the rest of y'all. We're really conservative. We should be able to secede. Oregon is deeply divided. Most of the state is red. We don't like being run by you liberal pinkos out in Portland. Again, land doesn't vote. So when you look at the numbers for those counties that went blue with 400,000 people voting in them versus counties that went for Donald Trump with 4,000 people voting in them. Land doesn't vote, people do. I want to make a video maybe later today, maybe later this week, talking about two books that I've read recently, White Rural Rage and Dying of Whiteness. And they talk a lot about the way that the Republicans have stoked this urban-rural divide. That rural America has really suffered at the hands of conservatives, and yet they continue to vote for their own suffering. This divide is artificial. It has been manufactured by the right. Rural America used to vote very blue, very pro-union, understanding the plight of the working class, but they've been indoctrinated by the Republicans for decades to vote against their own interests. The way out of this is a united America. It's understanding that we have a common oppressor. that there is no red versus blue, there is no rural versus urban. It's the American people versus tyrant Trump.